One day, I came home to find my room completely empty. Shocked, I turned around and heard my sister-in-law's triumphant voice behind me. A childless, unproductive woman like you does nothing but get in the way. Get out! It was clear she was trying to force me out and take over my parents' house. That's ridiculous. I'll get to the bottom of this, I told her firmly. My name is Catherine. I'm a 40-year-old single office worker. It's not that I've never met someone good, but life didn't pan out that way, and I've never married. Sometimes I feel lonely, but I've come to accept that marriage isn't everything. Being single has its perks. It's peaceful and carefree. After my father passed away 3 years ago, my mother was left alone. She's elderly, and though her mind is sharp, she broke her leg last year and has had difficulty moving around since. She uses a cane, sometimes a wheelchair, and needs help at home. Since I'm single and live nearby, I moved in with her to help. It's just the two of us now, enjoying our quiet days together. I don't regret being here, for her it would have been much harder if I were married and living far away. However, not everyone is happy with this arrangement, especially my sister-in-law. She's in her early 30s, much younger than me, and married to my older brother. They live far away but visit during holidays like Christmas and summer vacation. Every time they come, she's incredibly harsh toward me. Last Christmas, she leaned in and whispered, "Catherine, still mooching off your parents, I see." "What? I'm not mooching," I shot back. "Living at your parents' home at 40 and being single, that's the definition of a parasite," she sneered. "I'm raising 3 kids, contributing to society. And you, singles like you are harmful. Why were you even born if you're going to stay single forever?" Her words hit me hard. What she didn't know was that I had once planned to marry, but I'm unable to have children due to a medical condition. When I told my ex about it, he assured me it didn't matter, and we started dating. But as time went on, outside pressures and complications led us to part ways. Even though I didn't choose to be single, my sister-in-law's cruel words cut deep. And yet, she has no problem taking advantage of me. She constantly demands money, using her kids as an excuse. "We have 3 kids, you know. Be generous with your gifts. Only $000 would be appropriate for their kindergarten enrollment celebration." She even said, "You don't have kids, so you wouldn't understand, but since we're letting you enjoy the joy of raising our kids, the least you can do is pay for their extracurricular activities." It's as if she thinks her children are my financial responsibility. Sure, I give gifts for special occasions, but why should I pay for their tuition or activities? When I told my mother and brother about her outrageous demands, they were shocked. They had no idea how bold and entitled she really was. "That's right, my sister-in-law only behaves this way when it's just the two of us. She's clever like that." This past New Year's, for example, she opened the gifts I had given my niece and nephew the moment my brother stepped down to help my mom. She sneered, "This is it. This tiny amount is your gift. Just how poor are you, you stingy woman?" It's the kind of thing my mom and brother would never believe because she acts perfectly polite around them. I've even considered recording her, but I worry about the fallout it could cause for family relationships. If I complain too much, my sister-in-law might stop visiting, which would mean my mom wouldn't get to see her beloved grandkids anymore. That would break her heart. So I usually just bite my tongue and let it go. But everything changed one weekday when my sister-in-law came over unexpectedly. It was unusual for her to visit on a weekday. My mom was at her senior daycare program. The kids were at daycare and later heading to their maternal grandparents, and I was working from home. When she arrived, she didn't waste time. "You know, I've been thinking we should move in here." I frowned. "See, excuse me. You heard me. We're planning to move into this house." "Wait, who's WE?" "My family, of course." "Why would you move in here?" "Because I'm pregnant with our 4th child," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Her family already had 3 kids: an elementary schooler, a kindergartner, and a preschooler, and now they were having a 4th. I couldn't help but be amazed at their energy, but they currently live near her parents, Who helped out with childcare? Why approve that setup? Isn't it better to stay closer to your parents? I asked. John's being transferred here, she explained. Ah, so my brother was going to work at a new branch office opening in our hometown. I vaguely remembered him mentioning it, though it hadn't seemed like a big deal at the time. I see, but wouldn't your parents still be a better support system for you? They're still working and don't like being asked for help too often. They always say things like, ask your husband first, or don't make children unless you're ready to take responsibility. I was stunned by how casually she talked about taking over the house. This was my home with my mother, and she was acting like it was hers for the taking. You can't depend on your parents. I could tell she was finding it hard to talk about having a fourth child. Well, that's your business. How would I know? I replied. I could understand why her parents might hesitate to help. From what my brother had told me, after work, he would clean, do laundry, and even cook dinner. My sister-in-law confirmed this was true. Despite being tired from work, my brother always tried to help as much as he could. I noticed he seemed exhausted whenever I saw him, and now I understood why. Even so, wasn't having another child a bit much, but I didn't want to criticize them for growing their family. Having a baby is a happy thing. After all, what I didn't understand was why they needed to move into our home. Seeing my confusion, she explained, it's a hassle dealing with my parents, and where we live now is just too far from everything. Instead of making John live and work here alone, we thought it'd be nice for all of us to move in. Then she said something shocking. So, Catherine, could you move out soon? Excuse me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why should I move out? Well, we're going to be a family of 6 soon, right? She reasoned. That's true, but... So this house will be too small for all of us. That's why I'm telling you to leave. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Sure, 6 people would make the house a bit crowded, but it wasn't impossible for all of us to live together, especially since the kids were still young. There was no need for me to leave. But my sister-in-law didn't see it that way. She raised her voice, annoyed. You're in the way. You're just an old woman who can't even have kids anymore. For our sake, get out. Oh, and don't move too far away. You still need to help us take care of the kids. I was speechless. After ranting, she stormed out, leaving me stunned. That night, I told my mom everything and called my brother. He sounded just as shocked. I already arranged for us to live in a separate house, he explained. Susan's been stressed with everything, but I don't understand why she'd want to move into your place. It seemed like her plan to move in was off the table for now. But things weren't over. One day, after working from home for a while, I went into the office. My mom was also away for an overnight stay at her daycare program. Exhausted, I returned home, only to be hit with the shock of my life. My room was completely empty. All my belongings gone. It was still undeniably my home, but my room, stripped bare. What on earth happened here? I whispered, staring at the empty space. When I got home, my room wasn't just empty, it was missing. More accurately, all my belongings were gone. My favorite things, my photo albums, everything. In shock, I shouted, "Where's all my stuff?" That's when I heard a voice behind me, making my heart skip a beat. "I threw them all away," said Susan casually. I spun around to see her standing there. "Susan, what are you doing here so late?" I asked. "Shut up. You wake the kids," she snapped. "Kids? What kids?" I rushed to the living room and found my 3 nephews and niece sound asleep on the couch. "What's going on here?" I demanded, completely stunned. Susan smirked. "You wouldn't leave, so I had to take matters into my own hands. If you won't move out, I'll make room for us myself." I was furious. "I'm not leaving. I already talked to my brother about this, and he said you had a separate house arranged." Susan laughed mockingly. "Who cares what your mother or brother thinks? If I move in with the kids, they'll agree with me in the end. Stop being so selfish." "What did you do with my things?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Oh, I had a junk removal service take it all away. It's gone," she replied without a hint of remorse. My heart sank. My precious photo albums, my keepsakes are gone. This is unbelievable, I whispered. Now you get it, so just leave already, she snapped. I tried to argue, but Susan was younger and stronger. She physically pushed me out of the house, locking the door behind me. It was late at night, and I had no choice but to leave. She ignored my calls and even the doorbell. With no other options, I spent the night at a budget hotel. The next day, I took time off work and rushed back home, determined to get answers. As I was unlocking the door, Susan appeared again, stepping out. Susan, let's talk. I couldn't reach my brother. What's going on? I said. She shrugged. Oh, my husband is on a business trip abroad. You know how hard it is to reach him with the time difference. Anyway, I was just heading out. Make sure you take care of the kids while I'm gone, she said casually before walking away. I stood there, stunned and furious. Susan left me in shock, dressed up and looking ready for something important. She quickly walked out, leaving me with no choice but to look after her 3 kids. That evening, when my mom returned home, I greeted her with a bitter expression. Ma'am, isn't this a bit much? I asked. My mom sighed. It's more than a bit much. Ignoring John's opinions and forcing her way in is bad enough. But leaving the kids and going out, that's unbelievable. If she needed someone to watch the kids, her own parents would have been a better option, she said. Exactly. What's the real benefit of her living here? And she went out looking all dressed up. It makes you wonder, I added. Agreeing with my mom, I hired a private investigator to figure out what was really going on. A month later, everything had changed. I was living in a small 1-bedroom apartment I had hurriedly rented back at my parents' house. My room had been completely remodeled by Susan. It looked nothing like it used to. When my brother John found out, he was furious. Susan, you can't just do whatever you want, he shouted. But Susan argued back. Once we moved in, it became our home. You're always away for work, and I thought it'd be nice for the family to stay together. Raising kids is hard. It's natural to want family support. When John mentioned that mom needed care, Susan dismissed it. Catherine's there, isn't she? She's always at home, so she must have a lot of free time, Susan said. I tried to explain. I'm not just sitting around. I work from home. But Susan was firm about not letting me move back. Don't think you can't get away with this forever, my brother told her. Finally, he called for a family meeting. During the meeting, Susan, my brother, my mom, and I sat together in the living room. Susan looked annoyed. Why are we even doing this? I'm pregnant, so let's hurry this up, she said, rubbing her belly. Ignoring her impatience, I turned to her. Susan, first, you need to apologize for throwing away my things without permission, I said. Susan scoffed. That's your fault for not moving out sooner. People like you, who can't even have kids, should live in some rundown apartment, she said, completely unapologetic. I held back my anger. I was living here to help care for Mom. Susan smirked and turned to my mom. Your mother-in-law would be much happier living with her grandkids than with you, she said smugly. My mom smiled calmly. Of course, I'd be happy to live with my grandkids, she replied. Susan looked triumphant. Did you hear that? It's way more meaningful for us to live here than someone unproductive like you, Susan said. But my mom wasn't done. If they were my real grandchildren, she added. Susan frowned, confused. What? At that moment, my brother placed a large envelope on the table. This is the result of the investigation into your affair, he said. Susan's face went pale. My brother remained calm as he responded to Susan. Ah, he said, making Susan look at him in surprise. You thought we wouldn't find out, didn't you? He continued, unbothered. What are you talking about? I didn't cheat on you, Susan denied it firmly. John ignored her words and pulled out several photos, spreading them across the table. Really? So, are these photos fake? Susan's face turned pale as she saw the images clear evidence of her flirting with another man. John continued, his tone cold. I thought it was strange when you insisted we move out of our parents' house. where they helped with the kids, and into this place. You claimed the city was more convenient, but you're not even using child care services. Instead, you've been dumping all the responsibilities on Catherine. Susan tried to defend herself. Well, I need a break too. Then why not use child care services, like today? John countered. It's a waste of money, she shot back. John shook his head, his frustration evident. A waste of money. Do you think I'm not giving you enough? I've been saving for our future. But look at this. He opened their bank book and slammed it on the table. The account balance was completely drained. What happened to all our savings? John demanded. Susan hesitated. It's in a different account. Oh, really? Show me that account, he said firmly. Susan stammered, her lies unraveling. I don't have the book right now. Maybe it's in the attic. John slammed his hand on the table. His patience gone? Enough with the lies. Can you still make excuses after seeing this? He shouted, pointing at the damning photos again. Susan broke down, apologizing weakly. I'm sorry, it was just a momentary lapse of judgment. But John didn't back down. A momentary lapse? You've been having an affair with this man since we got married. He told me everything. Susan's eyes widened in panic. What? Why did you talk to him? He has a family too. Yes, and he confessed under the condition I wouldn't tell his wife, John replied coldly. He betrayed me, Susan cried out. John glared at her. The one who betrayed us is you. Susan seemed flustered by John's anger but quickly regained her composure. Wiping the sweat from her brow, she spoke with a calculated tone. I regret the affair, and I won't do it again. But we shouldn't divorce. It's better for the kids to stay with their mother. And more importantly, I'm carrying a new life. Do you really want to be separated from your child? She turned to look at our mom, her voice manipulative. You can't expect grandchildren from your childless daughter. If I take the kids and leave after the divorce, you'll never see them again. Is that what you want? Mom's expression didn't waver, but the tension in the room grew thicker as Susan tried to assert control over the situation. Susan turned to my mother, and when we didn't respond, she laughed smugly. You're just an old, useless woman. It's normal for her to leave. She stomped around the room, but then something unexpected happened. My mother calmly said, well, you, who are completely useless to me, should also leave with your child. Susan paused, confused by what she heard, and John handed her a document. What's this? She asked. John answered. It's the result of a DNA test. The test shows that the kids aren't mine. Susan was shocked. What? How is that possible? John continued. The DNA test also confirms that these kids are actually your affair partners, not mine. Susan's face turned pale. She tried to deny it, but John kept going. So, they're not my kids, and they're not even my mom's grandchildren. They're strangers. Susan was speechless, but then she tried to defend herself. No, that's not true. You knew, didn't you? You knew. My mom spoke calmly. You're a burden because you can't even have my son's children. Please pack up and leave with the kids. Susan, desperate, shouted. What? Are you going to throw us out onto the street? You monster. But then another voice echoed through the room. The real monster here is you. Susan spun around, her eyes wide in shock. Dad, why are you here? And Mom too? To everyone's surprise, Susan's real parents walked in. They had agreed to take the kids after John explained everything. Her father looked furious. You disgraceful daughter. As a parent, I'm ashamed of you. Susan's face went pale, and she started sobbing. Her father, with a stern face, added, We'll make sure you pay for all the damages. Susan, still crying, asked, Damages? Are you going to pay for me, Dad? Her father responded firmly. I'll pay now, but you will pay me back, even if it takes your whole life. Her parents took Susan, still sobbing, away without waiting for her response. Her mother kept bowing deeply to us, apologizing for her daughter's actions. It was strange to think that such good parents raised a daughter like Susan. Later, my brother John easily went through the divorce. Susan's parents paid off the alimony and all her debts from the affair. The kids were returned to their grandparents' home, where they'd often stayed before. They were growing up just fine, without any confusion. Dan, who had always believed the kids were his, said with sadness, the kids didn't do anything wrong. It was hard for him to accept that they weren't his children, but he hoped in time his emotional wounds would heal. 3 years later, John found a good partner and had a child of his own, but that's his story for another time. As for Susan, my brother's ex-wife, she gave birth to her 4th child. Sure enough, after testing, it turned out the baby wasn't John's either. Under the watchful eye of her parents, she worked tirelessly from morning to night for a while, but continued her affair. Not deterred, eventually, her affair was exposed to her lover's wife, which caused a huge fight. More alimony was added to her burdens, and she was kicked out by her parents. No one knows what happened to her after that. As for me, I'm living a peaceful life, taking care of my mom as always. In fact, everything she had gotten rid of was recovered the same day by contacting the waste disposal company. On a quiet day, a familiar face appeared. It had been a while. The man standing before me was the one I had once thought about marrying. He smiled and said, I couldn't forget about you. I've been single all this time, and my parents finally gave in. They wanted me to marry now that my brother has a child. They said I could do as I please. I know it may be late, but I can't think of anyone else. I want to help you take care of your mom. Will you marry me? I was so surprised that tears filled my eyes. Without hesitation, I ran into his arms, and he held me gently. Smiling,